where's his name? Hello, and welcome to Cahnmann's Current Events Roundtable. Today, we are welcoming back one of my favorite guests, Richard Reeder, who is an author and a great lecturer. And I thought that we needed to talk about critical issues in U.S. politics. And when I brought that to you, you absolutely agreed about that.
And it's so nice to be back.
And thank you again for coming back to Cahnmann's Roundtable. And one of the things that that's really going on right now, and every program is, the report, the Mueller report, of course, is coming. That just came out. And yet, there was no collusion and no, with Russia and all these other things. And yet, we have 3 members of Congress, Jerry Nadler, Adam Schiff, and Maxine Waters, is still wanting to investigate, more investigations, and another investigations. And we've had how many years of this Mueller investigation?
About a year and a half. But don't forget this. So you're talking about Schiff, and he's the Intelligence Committee, and Nadler is the Judiciary Committee. So they feel that there's enough in the Mueller report for them to pursue, to acquire some more information, to see where it will lead. So they are not, though Nadler talked about impeachment. He was asked on Meet the Press the other day whether or not there's enough information from the Mueller report to pursue impeachment. He had this pregnant pause for about 10 seconds, and then he said, yes, I think there is enough. So, but the Democrats are divided on this. You have people like Elizabeth Warren, a presidential candidate, who would like to pursue impeachment right now. Nancy Pelosi, the House leader, is taking a more deliberative approach. Wait and see, gather more information. So the Democrats are divided on whether or not impeachment is going to be on the table for the next year. So right now, I think it's going to be pursuing. I think William Barr is going to be called, for the Attorney General. He's going to be called in May in front of the in one of the committees, and Don McGuane, the attorney. Former attorney for Trump, will be also called. So people are just going to wait and see what comes out in this testimony.
But why, there's so much going on in this world right now. In fact, I was in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and I met with a lot of Canadians in Mexico. And they know so much about our politics. We know very little about what's going on in Canada, except for, their leader. We know about their.
Justin Trudeau.
Yes, that's it. That's all we know. That's all we know about Justin Trudeau. That their leader. That's it. And yet, and I met people from Scotland, and I met people from Germany there, and I met people from all over the world. And they know so much about our politics, and we know very little of what's going on in this world. And I think it's because every station is carrying 24/7. 24/7. You could turn on any time of day or night, and it's about Russia, 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 impeachment, 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 collusion, collusion, collusion. I mean, you're not learning about what's happening in Ireland, what's happening in Norway, what's happening in Finland, what's happening in Germany. We don't know what's happening in any other country except if it was a severe like earthquake or hurricane, or what happened in France recently in the fire, at Notre Dame. But we don't know what's happening in the world. Because our stations are only carrying the same topic over and over and over.
It's becoming commentary and opinion rather than news.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what cable news has become. It's become commentary and opinion.
It's like the National Enquirer. I compare it to the National Enquirer because it's just an opinion of people. And I mean, we're talking about wanting to impeach. I mean, tell our viewers a little bit what is impeachment and what it entails, because we keep hearing the word impeachment, and what exactly is impeachment?
Well, it's a formal charge. It would be a formal charge toward the president, and you have to come up with criminal actions in order to pursue an impeachment, which would lead to eventually a trial of the president. We didn't get that far with Nixon, but with Bill Clinton, Nixon had resigned, but there was an impeachment process with President Clinton.
But we've had Mueller investigation for so long.
That was a special counsel, though. That was not part of Congress.
But they would have found, if there was any criminal, anything that was criminal, really criminal, it would have been brought out. And nothing was brought out of the man. I mean, I don't think he killed his wife. I don't think he killed anybody. I don't think he broke into anybody's house and stole all their money. What would be criminal?
Well, obstruction of justice would be criminal. So I think that's what.
But they found no obstruction.
Well, that's right. Not in the Mueller report.
Right.
But there are possible roads to looking at kind of probing what was in the Mueller report to make a case for, at least that's what Chairman Schiff and Nadler want to do right now, is to see if that obstruction for justice could be proven. And
but that's going to take.
It's going to take a long time. It's going to take. It's long. It's
going to be the same amount of time as a Mueller, and by that time he'll be out of.
That's right.
What is it, about 18? We have about 20 more months
about 19 more
months,
or
whatever, of his presidency.
And even the Senate is Republican controlled, so you wonder how far it can go. Even if the House decides to impeach, would it even be brought up in the Senate?
And I think that's what Nancy Pelosi is trying to convey to the other, to these very left-wing side of the Democratic Party. She's trying to convey that.
Well, it's political strategy too. So Nancy Pelosi is worried if you create impeachment against President Trump, does he use this during the campaign, especially if the impeachment is starting to take place as we get into the 2020 presidential campaign? Would it look like, well, the Democrats are acting, they're acting unreasonable, bullying Trump, which is always kind of funny because Trump is the one that's usually called the bully. But it might come out that it looks like the Democrats are bullying Trump. So it could be, it could have some negative consequences for the Democrats. So Pelosi is a very smart leader. She got to be where she is. She's a very smart woman. So she's taking a more cautioned approach.
Well, she's the Democrat that's been around, the traditional Democrat.
That's right.
And we're hearing from another, it's whatever it's like from the left or extreme right. People are more in the middle, but there's always a percentage that are extreme left and extreme right. And I think the American people are tired of this. They're looking in their states. We talked about in Chicago. Look at the infrastructure. It takes us from the suburbs getting downtown on a Friday. Should be a 30, 40-minute drive. It takes 2 hours. If you want to get somewhere at 6 o'clock, you better be on that expressway by 3 o'clock, the latest, or you're not going to get downtown for hours.
Well, when there was talk after President Trump was elected, there was talk that infrastructure was one thing you would think that the Democrats and Republicans could agree upon, because you need infrastructure in cities, suburbs, and in rural areas.
Right.
And here we are now, 2.5 years into the Trump administration, and there is no legislative initiative at all on infrastructure.
Because all these proceedings have taken
the proceedings have taken a long time,
a long time, and it's taken the wind out of the sails, so to speak. And people I think they're frustrated right now. They're very frustrated. And what we're talking about also is I'm looking at the Granite State poll for 2020. on the different Democratic candidates that are up for office. Right now, I got 5 that have some percentages after their name.
And there's about 14 or 15 candidates right now.
And this poll, remember, is just one poll.
Right.
And these polls are gonna bounce around a lot.
And that's Vermont, the Granite State.
And
it's based in Vermont.
Exactly.
So when you read those numbers, you're going to see a Bernie Sanders slant, correct?
Right. Bernie Sanders, 30%.
Yes.
Joe Biden, 18%. Pete Buttigieg, 15%. Elizabeth Warren, 5%. And Kamala Harris, 4%.
Right.
But there's other
but if you
polls
go,
around.
But if you go into some states with significant African American communities that are strong in the Democratic base, let's say North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia, you're going to see Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, the 2 African American presidential candidates, you're going to see their numbers spike. So one of the problems that Bernie Sanders had in the run against Hillary Clinton in 2016 was he was not carrying those states where there was a significant African American community. So you're going to see in Vermont, New Hampshire, it's going to be very different. Iowa, it's going to be very different than in Georgia or the Carolinas.
So what do you think about, who do you think is going to come out as a front runner? Who do you, just make a wager on who you think is going to?
Well, I think you have to say that because Sanders ran in 2016, he's a known commodity out there. A lot of people felt that he got cheated because of those superdelegates who went for Clinton. I think a lot of the progressive left sentimentally feel we're going to be backing Sanders. So I think he has an edge, at least with the left of the party, the progressive wing of the party, an edge over, say, Warren. But then you have somebody like Joe Biden, who is not formally declared. Now, Biden represents an older, more moderate constituency in the Democratic Party. And I don't know if that's going to sell with the way you have millennial and Gen X voters in the Democratic Party now giving it energy in its base. I don't know how well Joe Biden would play. So my instinct tells me that Bernie Sanders is going to do rather well in some of those early primaries. And I think the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, rather than a Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of a small Indiana city, South Bend, I think Buttigieg, perhaps, or Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, I think Klobuchar, and this is just my guessing, I think that they're going to start making some roads into the moderate wing of the Democratic Party in some of these primaries.
And they could also, whoever comes in close possibly could be whoever's going to be running for the president of that party.
Right.
They could run as their vice
Right.
president too. The only thing now with Bernie Sanders, he's got free everything, free college. You don't have to pay back your loans. Universal universal health care or Medicare for all, whatever you want to say. And this sounds great. I know the students, they love this. They don't have to pay for college. They won't have to pay back their loans. Everyone's going to have free health care. But first of all, how are they going to, who's going to pay for it? And who's going to run the programs? And I know that I talked to several of the Canadians that really love their health care, but at the same time, if it's not a severe problem, they need a knee replacement or they need a hip replacement, they go on a waiting list, and some of those waiting lists could be several years before they get that.
Right.
And a lot of them will go when they need an MRI or a CAT scan. They can't get it right away. Like I could call tomorrow and I can make a CAT scan appointment or MRI appointment by next week.
Right.
and a lot of them will take their savings and they'll go into the United States and they'll pay for it that way.
Right.
If you're wealthy enough, you can do it.
Yeah.
So how are they going to do this? And I mean, who's going to pay for it? The government's going to pay for it. They want to tax the rich. The richer, their taxes are probably the highest of everybody's.
And what happens in capitalism when so many of the middle class who own stocks, equities, they have stocks in insurance companies.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Prudential, United Healthcare, and if somebody like Senator Sanders, who's been quoted saying, you know what, there will be a role for insurance companies. They can fund cosmetic surgery, that kind of thing. But again, you know, there's socialism and socialism, and you have socialism in countries like Denmark and Finland. Norway, there's 3 to 4, 5, 6 million people in those countries, and then you have socialism that's bankrupting a country like Venezuela. So
we recently had a guest from Venezuela, and we had one young man. There were 2 young men at the table. One was from Venezuela who absolutely hated socialism. He said it completely destroyed his country because socialism, the person on top always comes out a winner, the top of the government, and they get all the money, and they're supposed to be at the same level as the people, but they turn out having the biggest houses, having the most money, and it doesn't come out the same way. And the other young man was all, he was all for socialism. He doesn't now, this is great, I won't have to pay back my school loans. He was so excited about it. And each one was trying to tell the other, it will work? No, it won't work. You're going to have Venezuela into your country. And so how is Bernie Sanders going to do this? How is he going to get everyone on board? And I think I mentioned, I went to Canada several years ago, and I saw a blouse for $25, and really cute blouse. I thought, I'm going to buy that for $25. By the time I ended up, my purchase ran $50. I had to pay a VAT tax, I had to pay a sales tax, and I paid another tax. So all the taxes, by the time I finished, my beautiful $25 blouse turned out to be a $50 blouse.
Right. I think in terms of Senator Klobuchar and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. What they would like to do is they would like to fine-tune the Affordable Health Care Act. Okay.
Joe Biden wants that too.
And Joe Biden wants to do that too, as opposed to a total overhaul of the system. So again, who knows, where does the Democratic Party go? I think if it is a Biden, but I think it's going to be more likely somebody like Klobuchar or Buttigieg. That's just my instinct. I think that Biden, who's going to be 76 or 77 by the time the 2020 presidential primary rolls along, I think there's a call for younger people.
But Bernie Sanders is going to be how old?
Well, I think Bernie's going to be the same age, about 76 or 77.
So he's really the same age as Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They're still in the same category.
Yeah, but again, I don't
Why
know.
Do they, the young people like, you're right, the young people like Bernie Sanders, and then they feel Joe Biden's too old, yet Sanders, they see him as themselves as a young guy.
But I think somebody like Kamala Harris, Senator Harris in California, I think if she does well, let's say in the Democratic primaries in the southern states with large African-American populations, Georgia, the Carolinas, I think she will do extremely well in California, a big state with a lot of delegates, and she'll probably do well in Washington State
but will
and
they
Oregon.
Come out and vote for her?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people it could be. Yeah, you really could have a brokered convention, especially with so many candidates out there. You could have, you could truly have a brokered convention. We have remember when President Trump ran and there were like 14 other candidates against him?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be similar, I think, in the Democratic Party.
I think there's going to be more candidates.
Yeah, but the television stations are going to have to try to figure out, in the polling, at what what's your minimum polling. If you have 2% or 3%, are you going to be in the primary debate?
See,
they have to figure that out.
And another thing that they haven't done, and hopefully, like a lot of the libertarians that I've talked to, they feel it's unfair. They're showing Republican candidates, Democratic candidates, you know, and they don't show any libertarian candidates. Or independent candidates.
Or Green Party candidates. You know, one can argue that Ralph Nader, in the 2000 election, with his Green Party, he took, you know, he snatched victory away from Al Gore, and, you know, the Green Party candidate who ran in the last presidential election in some of those states like Michigan and Wisconsin, her name Dr. Stein, she took enough votes away, not allowing Hillary Clinton to win in those states.
And you know, they weren't shown that much. Only on certain stations you would get a you know, a town hall meeting and they would be shown. But it wasn't really fair to other you know, in other countries there's different, you know, parties that run, like in Israel.
Yeah, that's a parliamentary system, but this is, you know, we're talking basically Democratic and Republican and all the minor parties.
And the minor parties aren't shown, only on maybe certain stations, or, you know, and you know, I'm going to try to get some minor parties on my show and try to advocate, you know, here's some minor parties, this is what their parties are. You know, we can't, you know, in public access shows, you cannot support any candidates, but you could at least, you know, show what is a you know, the libertarian, what is
and libertarians,
independent.
you know, they spoil the votes for the Republican candidates, just as the Green Party spoils votes for the Democratic candidates. But, you know, we are a two-party system. There's been many tries going back to, you know, Theodore Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party and all the manifestations of progressive parties like Robert La Follette in the early 20s, George Wallace with his party in the 60s. Those third parties in this system do not seem to work.
Well, we're getting like in the Democratic Party is the Democratic Socialists versus the mainstream Democrat. So there is like two. It's almost like two parties right there.
You see, you know, in Chicago politics right now, the new city council in the city of Chicago will have, and there's 50 aldermen in the city of Chicago. There will be 6 Democratic socialists on the city council of Chicago. So and especially, you know, the Democratic Party, it's being torn both ways right now between the moderates and, you know, the more progressive.
Because of progressive, we got a progressive mayor in Chicago.
That's
she's not only a female, she's black, and she's lesbian. And when has that ever happened? I mean, we were stuck with the Daley machine for 1,000 years.
Yeah, the dream of identity politics, right?
And so we want to see what she's going to be offering.
Yeah, and my condolences to her, because, my God, to govern the city of Chicago with its myriad problems right now. I wish her the best, but it's going to be a very, very difficult task.
In fact, when we went for lunch at the Bluegrass today, and I spoke to the owner, Joni, and I told her what we were talking about, she says, "Oh my God, that's what you're talking about today." You know, I mean, everybody, they don't know what to say. You know, when we talk about Chicago politics, U.S. politics, it's so overwhelming. And in so many different homes, and Thanksgiving, Sarah, you know, a lot of people wanted to know who's going to be at the Thanksgiving table before they would even come. You know, Democrats against, and we even had at our table, it was my son's table, we try not to, don't talk politics, Mom. Nobody's talking politics. You know, we had to, because we wanted everybody to be cohesive, and, you know, we wanted to see what, you know, over the Seder this year.
It's polarizing. It's never been more polarizing in politics right now. Unfortunately, it leads to paralysis. It leads to paralysis on the national level, and that's why we're not getting good concrete legislation through.
Because
the Democrats and the Republicans in a lot of ways are not talking to each other. They don't want to. The Democrats do not want to look supportive of, let's say, President Trump's. Let's say if an infrastructure bill was passed, it would be viewed as.
Or what about immigration?
Or immigration reform.
Yeah, I mean, we're having a really bad problem on the southern border, right?
Right.
And people are coming in from, Mexico kept them for so long, and now I understand they're coming in.
Nobody wants to come up with common ground.
Yeah.
You have divergent opinions, and it's not leading, the way it used to be in Washington, you would come up with various views and you'd compromise. But compromise nowadays seems to be a dirty word. And because compromise is not happening, because people don't want to give in their political trenches, there are no compromises and there's no legislation. Talk about immigration reform. Immigration reform was a great compromise between President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill in 1986 that led to the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. It was a great compromise.
They were from two different parties.
And they were from two different parties, but they were friends.
Yeah.
They could, in off hours, they could play poker together.
Or golf.
They're golf, and
Yeah.
they could kibitz with each other.
Right.
But that kind of thing doesn't exist anymore. So the bipartisanship is gone. The cordiality is gone. And what has happened is you've had two polarizing forces that are pulling and tugging at each other.
And it's unfortunate because the American people are the people that are suffering
Yeah.
because we're in between.
Because nothing gets done.
It's like, the rope that,
Yeah.
and who pulls, and then
Right.
you're right in the middle.
Nothing gets
You're
done.
Nothing's getting done. Nothing on immigration. Everything
Right.
is happening right now. No
So
infrastructure.
we're the losers.
We're
The American people are the losers, right.
And it's unfortunate. And even if we change people in Congress, they'll end up the same way.
But politics, so Democrats feel that they have to move to the left in Democratic primaries to win their primary. And Republicans feel they have to move to the right in the Republican
So do you see anybody competing on the Republican side?
My feeling is there's no serious candidate. You have the former governor of Massachusetts, and I don't think that's a serious candidate.
You mean you're talking about Romney?
Yeah, well, Romney has articulated his opposition to the moral stance of President Trump. Now, will Romney be able to win a Republican primary? I don't think so.
No.
Let's say if something comes up in some of these investigations, and if President Trump is forced to resign, let's not even talk about impeach.
Or he gets ill.
Yeah. Okay, something like that. He's a man in his 70s,
Right.
He's overweight. Who knows what could happen? I still think the rising star in the Republican Party is not Mitt Romney. I think it's Nikki Haley.
It is Nikki
and,
Haley.
Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, ambassador of the United Nations, a woman, an Asian American woman of Indian ancestry.
Right.
I think a Nikki Haley could be a very attractive
Young,
candidate,
and she would
that
attract
could bring
women
in
on both
women
sides.
and independents.
And independents.
Yeah.
And she was a very good ambassador
Right.
too.
So a year and a half or a year and 2/3, it's a long time in political terms. So
Right.
who knows what would happen?
Well,
Anything can happen. So
Well, Richard Reeder, you've been so, you have done so much. I enjoy always having a conversation with you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's always been great.
We still have a minute or so left. What is your prediction? While we have, I think, about a minute left in our program today, what is your prediction of, we're not going to hold you accountable. You could just, what you think is going to happen.
I think you might have a Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee in 2020. Coming out of what I said from the southern primaries and the western states primaries. And I think that you might have somebody like Mayor Pete Buttigieg emerging as the vice presidential candidate. So a Harris, but a judge.